but I wanted to start out. Everyone has just seen the first episode of Fleishman Is in Trouble, an excellent miniseries, and you should definitely keep up and watch the rest if you haven't already. But since this is the Jewish Book Festival, the first event of the first Jewish book festival here in New York, I thought maybe we should talk about the book first.
Okay.
Since we're both writers, and when I first got to know you, yes, with books. So when I first met you, you were a magazine profile writer, like the Libby character in the show and in the book, and were really, I think, to anyone who read you in GQ or in the New York Times Magazine, a kind of generational talent at writing profiles. And I guess the first question I have, the question that I had when I first heard you were writing this novel is, why?
Why? It's such a good Jewish question, right? This is really.
You have all these real people you could write about.
Why not more? But
why
invent a book?
Why invent people when you have so many real ones you could be writing about?
I wrote a book for very practical reasons. I wrote a book because I had just done an interview with Jimmy Buffett, who is not Warren Buffett. I know for a second in your head you're like, which one is that? He wrote Margaritaville, right? And I was talking to him, and because when you interview somebody, you can ask them whatever question you want, and it doesn't make it to the paper unless you put it in. I said to him, I feel like I'm pretty successful, but I feel like I'm going to be broke forever. And what is the sort of, at what point do you become less broke? And he said to me, when I wrote Margaritaville, I knew it was going to be a child that supported me in my old age. Do you have any children that are supporting you in your old age? And I was writing these profiles of people, which are not things that get made into movies. So that was the first reason. And the second reason is because of a crisis of conscience I was having. So the first reason, it was just to be crazy, it was money, yeah. The second reason was because I was having this crisis of conscience. At the time, I was interviewing all of these 50-year-old men who were very famous, who had been married to a famous woman, were now divorced from the famous woman, had had 2 children with the first wife, and were now married to someone who used to work for them and had 2 more children. And they were all talking about how they're they used to be miserable, but now they're happy. And it seemed clear to me that as with anyone, when you get a chance to redo things, you do them better. But they all framed it as, I was so unhappy with this woman, not even mentioning her name, as if I didn't know what it was. And this was not one person or 2 people or 3, it was a lot of men in this period of time. And I thought, I wonder what she would say. And so the book, which seems like it's a book about divorce, and it seems like it's a book about a midlife crisis, and it's all of those things, and about money, and about class, and about New York, but it's also about who we're listening to when we tell a story, and the vacuum of the other person in the story. Long answer.
Well, right, because it also seems to be, and not to spoil anything, and if you've seen just this first episode, you think that it is the story of a man, and that we're in a way, a kind of a familiar Jewish literary and pop cultural territory of male sexuality and male dissatisfaction, and in the sort of Philip Roth, Woody Allen, Paul Mazursky sort of world. And it's interesting that you kind of, did you start out there and sort of know what the change of perspective was going to involve? I mean, that is to say, how much of the book what was there kind of in your head when you were starting, and how much did you discover as you were working on it?
That's such a good question. Nobody's asked me that. I did not think that the change in perspective would be any part of the book. It happened as I was writing it, but what was there for me was this the books I grew up loving were these Philip Roth books or these John Updike books about these tortured men. And I loved them. I loved them like without an asterisk. Like sometimes I hear people on podcasts talking about this and like, oh, her contempt for, no, I loved them and I still love them. But what happened is that as I was telling this story, which I thought was about sort of an economic moment and a dating moment and a divorce moment, that like people were now getting divorced and the underlying current of the divorces, no one ever said to me, my wife makes more money than I do. But it was always there. In every divorce I heard about right after I turned 40, that was the condition of it. And I felt like that's a magazine story, right? So I called up my editor at GQ, and he said, that does not sound like a good story. And I said, I'll show him.
So I have
I still think probably still thinks it would be a bad magazine story.
Well, I have kind of a question about, in a way, the difference between the magazine story or the nonfiction book, the sort of, the Gay Talese book or the answer to that, which I think, figures as a model in there. But just as a writer, especially as a profile writer, you have this way of really getting into the presence and almost into the skin of the people that you write about, whether it's Jimmy Buffett or Gwyneth Paltrow or Jonathan Franzen or Tonya Harding. You spend a lot of time, figuring out what makes them tick and in a way what it's like to be them. And I wonder how it's different to do that in fiction when you have sort of a blank slate. There's not a real person there whose likeness you're drawing. You're kind of drawing it from your head, and yet these characters are so vivid and so real. So I was just wondering, as a kind of craft question, a technique question, how you get those characters as opposed to the real ones to live on the page.
That's a good question. I think that what's the Anna Karenina thing, like all happy families are the same and all miserable families
are unhappy in their own way.
Thank you. I knew he would. Now ask him the next paragraph, and he could say it too. Yes, good.
Not in Russian, though.
Yeah, he'll say it in Russian now. I think that all divorces are the same. Like, I think that's actually not correct. I think that everyone I know who is getting divorced, who has gotten divorced, has the same. So it's actually not that hard to invade the point of view once you have sort of 3 people or 5 people and the consensus is the same. Because it's never so far from what you would feel. I mean, that's how I did that with those people. They weren't telling me what their feelings were. They would say, I got divorced and I stopped working for a while. I mean, celebrities, let's say, or I broke my leg and I stopped working for a while. And it's an easy thing to draw that they were depressed. And you could say that with some confidence. It's the same thing. Only these people, you could ask them directly, were you upset, were you depressed, were you, and if they say yes, which they will say in a way that Gwyneth Paltrow will not say, that's like a gift.
That's interesting. And tell me about, was there, this is a novel about its characters and about the divorce and about friendship. It's also shedding a kind of light on New York life and on various aspects of it that some of us may not have discovered or known about. So tell me about the research. I mean, you're a reporter.
I'm a reporter.
There's a lot in here about private school, about dating apps, about all kinds of other things. I mean, what kind of legwork were you doing?
Thank you for asking. I, as you know, lived in New Jersey while I was writing this book. And I really missed New York, and I longed for New York. And I lived there for 7 years because my husband had a job there. And literally from the minute I got there, I was so unhappy. I had just spent 10 years in Los Angeles. I was born in New York. I never wanted to leave. Like, for someone who never wanted to leave, I spent 17 years, and I never really adjusted to those places. Like, I don't think I'm so sophisticated that I would need to live in New York. I think I'm so provincial that I need to live where I'm from. My mother and one of my sisters is here. Like, it's like a very sort of clannish place. The rest, they all live in Brooklyn. We're from Brooklyn. I have an aunt who bought the studio, who is indecisive, and bought the studio next to her, but can't decide what to do with it. So I had little children, and I would come to the city and stay in her studio apartment for 2 or 3 nights. My aunt and my uncle, my very wonderful Aunt Lois and Uncle Alan, they are not here, but they might be on the webcast, and I always want to thank them. And while I was there, I would go outside and I would buy food, and it was a little bit like, what's the Philip Roth book where Nathan Zuckerman comes back to the city and everyone has a cell phone? Is it the Exit Ghost?
Yeah, maybe.
It's Exit
Yeah.
Ghost. And I was like, why is everything, like, the Upper East Side used to be like a strange little middle-class neighborhood where there were some people with starter apartments. That's the first place I lived, and I was broke. And then there were people who lived on Fifth Avenue, and that was what was interesting about it. And now, money, like, reading Thomas Piketty did not teach me as much about the disappearance of the middle class, look at everyone nodding, as like a couple of weekends on the Upper East Side. And I used to be a camp director at the 92nd Street Y. And we had all of these kids there from Harlem, and now, like, there was nobody, it was just these rich kids carrying things of sushi for the day. Children eating sushi. I could not believe it. Like, that seems like that's like a baby boom joke, right? Like, children with sushi.
So you just camped out there and
I just camped out there, and that was my research, is walking outside and seeing these people with T-shirts, these like crazy, audacious T-shirts that said bad things about them. Like, it was so strange. It's like, when I wear a T-shirt, it's like, I'll wear my New York Times T-shirt when I'm feeling insecure and like I want people to know that I belong somewhere. Or I will wear like the T-shirt of a 5K, just so they know that one day, maybe not recently, I did a 5K.
Or you know somebody who did.
And these people were like, have shirts that said like yoga and vodka. Like, what does that say about you? Like, why did you buy it? What is your, like, what do you want me to know about you? Yeah. That was my research.
So, well, it was very effective.
Thank you. It's changed since then, by the way. We shot in New York, and there were no more T-shirts like that. Ever since, in the last 5 years, the T-shirts have all become rainbows that say, be kind. And, like, I don't know.
Well, that's an interesting, actually, because I do want to get into the further evolution of this into the TV show, and of you, from profile writer to novelist to showrunner and television mogul.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's in my contract that he has to say mogul.
Yes. It's on her business card. But one thing that's interesting about the TV show that I think is different from the book is that specific period aspect, that it's set, in the summer before the 2016 election, and you'll see it as the episodes go on. It doesn't that comes in, obliquely but noticeably, and does affect. Does resonate with some of the themes about men and women, about gender, about misogyny, about female ambition, that were there in the novel to begin with. So I was wondering about the decision, when it happened and how it happened, to make it, and you wrote a really interesting piece about this in New York Magazine, a period piece set in a period that seems like it was just, a little bit ago.
But it wasn't. It was like 3 eras ago
right.
in New York.
It was before COVID. It was before Trump. Yeah.
So there was COVID, and the show is about a doctor. And the way it would change things for COVID to be a part of this show it did not seem A, fun, B, interesting, C, like anything I would want to watch, and also the way COVID.
And how would he be having all that sex if there was?
I know. How is he going to have all that sex? I wrote when the paperback came out, New York Magazine asked me to write something for them, and I didn't want to write any more nonfiction about the book, so I wrote, and COVID had started, so I wrote a short story for New York Magazine that's findable called Fleishman Is in Lockdown, and it takes place over. Thank you. It takes place over one day at one of those surgical hospitals where you get a facelift that was commandeered for specialists. So it's him working only on emergency cases that were allowed to come in through COVID, and the nurses are all still these plastic surgery nurses, so people are being wheeled around in Barca loungers, and someone who has like a kidney transplant is told that they look well rested, like, you look so rested, you look so well rested, you look so refreshed, and it just, like, that was so harrowing to write. It was like 5,000 words. There was no way to keep this story alive through COVID because she goes missing. Like, what if she died? Like, what if she's on a respirator? So back to the t-shirts. Always back to the t-shirts.
The t-shirts are an amazing motif in the show, by the way, through all of the episodes.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, we haven't representative from FX here today. We should have done something merch-wise because there were all these shirts right around when I was finishing revisions on the novel. There were all of these shirts. I remember being in a coffee shop and finishing it while women in pantsuits who were canvassing for Hillary and their daughters all had shirts that said, "The future is female," which always reminds me of that sign outside a bar that says "Free beer tomorrow." Like it's always in the future. The female future is in the future. Keep going. And it's like a trick. And I always thought, whenever I saw those t-shirts, if it were true, they would never let us wear them. So that's why it felt urgent to keep it in there. It felt like it was like to whisper to the reader that or maybe you'll look back and see that there was something maybe I knew what I was doing, and he signed.
But you decided to make it explicit in the show.
Yeah, it wasn't explicit in the book because you were just living.
Right.
You didn't know that you were part of this weird before time at this moment. But when you do the TV show, not only do you have the opportunity to look back and say, I can sharpen this, but you also have the opportunity to say, like, I am making a bold choice to not include COVID in this because he's a doctor and it would be a mess.
I'm curious about how, because, I mean, it's unusual that somebody who writes the novel also is as involved in the show, in the adaptation. I mean, usually, you sell the novel, you cash your check, and then someone else, then, a couple years or whenever later, you turn on your TV and you think, you see what has become of your child, and what's been done to it. But you were the showrunner and writer on this show, and I'm wondering how, in adapting it, your feeling about your understanding of the story and the characters changed, and if it turned into something different in any way.
It was much harder because it's a good question. It was much harder because when you write something in a book or even in a script, there's so much white space around the people you're writing about that you can just put in what you want the reader to know, or what you want the reader who's reading a script to know. But then actors come into play, production designers come into play, costume designers come into play, and everybody suddenly has to make decisions on how to fill the space that you left. And it worried me because I didn't know, Claire Danes refused to play Rachel as like the way I saw her as this horrible bitch. And she was like, no, I love her. She's this great character. And I was like, sure. But she was right to do it. Like now when I look at it, it's the perfectly tempered. The truth is that was I the perfect person to do this? Maybe not because of those things. Maybe someone else might have had a little bit of freedom, but also there are a lot of things that would have gone away. So I don't know. I think the characters did change and they did evolve because they became real people and not just these sketches, not just a list of attributes and a list of things that they've said, right? Mm-hmm. They became like humans who also, pick their nose and trip over stairs and have to have facial expressions all the time. That's something that I never, that worried me all the time. It doesn't worry me now. I look at it and I, those people know what they're doing.
I mean, it's fascinating because you'd written about actors a lot.
I know.
And this is kind of seeing them and their work from a radically different angle.
So radically different. I can't believe how much of my career I was told these stories were good that I wrote, and I never thought to ask them about acting. Isn't that weird? I would interview actors, and I was so interested in what fame had done to them and what it's like to walk down the street as them. And it never occurred to me to say, so what is this like for you? And the ones who tried to tell me, I couldn't even figure out. Bradley Cooper was trying to tell me about acting. And I was like, sure. Okay. But what's it like? Do you feel hampered by your handsomeness? I literally said things like that while he was trying to tell me everything I could have known for this.
But actors, I mean, in my experience, actors often don't know. I've interviewed, when I have interviewed actors.
No, they're just not telling us because they know how they sound when they talk about it. Because they can talk completely articulately about it, but they know what
But
we
it
do.
sounds very strange. Or they talk. I mean, I remember once interviewing Robert De Niro, and who's sort of famously difficult and has a hard time talking about acting. And I would ask him, I would say, what was it like working with Bertolucci on 1900? And he would say, oh, that was really, really interesting, because sometimes he would tell me to stand over here, and the light was over there, and I would turn toward the light, and he would say, no, don't turn toward the light, turn the other way. And it was like it was stories like that were.
It's like Being There. He was like a Being There character in.
But he's, whatever it is.
Do you think he just didn't want to tell? Do you think that they kind of don't trust that we'll know what to do with it, or that we'll use it? Because a lot of people who come before us make fun of them. Right? I think about all of the time I've had to spend sort of doing this dance of I'm not gonna hurt you. Whatever it is, my intentions here are good. But you look at Ethan Hawke, whom we both love and talked about a lot when I was writing about him. Every story that was ever written about him was about how he takes himself too seriously. That's a terrible, to go to somebody who is doing well in their profession and then make fun of them for taking their profession and themselves seriously. I don't know, what's more serious than a person, right?
Well, and an artist should take their work seriously. I mean, I think some of it too is that what they do. I'm sorry, we're straying from the topic, and we will have a few minutes for questions.
You guys will have to ask some other questions.
Yes. Anyway, but I think often it's intuitive. I mean, it's sort of like asking an athlete, how did you do that? They don't necessarily know the answer. They know the work that went into producing that moment, but they're not necessarily conscious of it.
That the reason we're writing about them, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, I just had this thought, that the reason we're talking about them, the reason we're talking to them is not because they're good at talking. Like, they're not obligated to be good at talking about themselves, right? Just because they are good at something. Right. That's a second thing that you could do. Like, Tanya Harding can talk about ambition, and she could talk about ice skating. She was the only athlete I ever interviewed who could really talk about the mechanism behind everything she did. Yeah.
All right, we have a few minutes for questions, and I think people might have some. So let's see. Do you have? And microphones are here. Yeah.
Hi, Tabby. First of all, well done.
Thank you.
Really
Thank
well
you.
done.
Thank you. My other sister's here. I didn't realize. I'm kidding. I don't know you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, I wrote down a number of really poignant things you said in the pilot. And I can't verbatim say them back to you, but you really kind of nailed it right out of the gate, where Jesse's character was looking out of the window and he said, "What is home?" And I thought, gosh.
And he said what? I'm sorry.
What is home?
Yeah.
And I thought that was a really powerful way to kick off the whole way. So you brought me in, and then it made me think, well, how did she get there? And how did she get from the book to a pilot? As I'm a writer myself, I cannot imagine the distillation that has to happen in you, and what do you cut and edit? And could you talk about that process?
I can, and it has to do, luckily, I have a lot of experience putting a lot of things out into the world, meaning articles. In order to sustain a living in journalism, you have to do it a lot, and you learn the best practices and conditions for it. And for me, it has always been having a great editor. I was very lucky that a lot of people were interested in making this book into a TV show. And the people I met that I found who spoke magic words to me and did all the way up until the end were Sarah Timberman and Susanna Grant. They are legends of the television industry and film. And I felt like I could write anything because like the greatest editors I have, they would not make fun of me for taking a big swing, it's so hard. That's the hard part, right? Being vulnerable and trying to do something new, which can make you look so dumb when you do it wrong. So I had that, but I also had this book to work from. And I wrote this book thinking no one would read it. I wrote this book thinking maybe if I'm lucky, it'll pay for summer camp for 1 year for my kids. And that's that would have done it for me. Because everyone, when I was a freelancer, I tried to be discerning about my stories, but editors knew that in April, I would take any story because it was time to pay for camp. And you can hold your financial life together very well. I don't know anyone else that this happens to, but camp would always take me by surprise. I'd be holding it together and go, camp. I'm off a little bit. I think that the answer is to always try to write like nobody's going to read it, which gets harder and harder, and that becomes your work. But that's a good problem to have. And also the idea in the book was I was imitating my heroes. I remember thinking, I love Jonathan Franzen, and I was like, people are gonna say she ripped off Jonathan Franzen, and nobody did because Jonathan Franzen's amazing, and I'm fine. But he is like nobody is going to do that. But you imitate who you imitate, and you take on their confidence. And I did that in profile writing too. There's a writer named Vanessa Gregoriadis that I worshipped, and I wanted to sound just like her, and I tried. I do not sound anything like her, but I took on her confidence, and it allowed me to sound like me in a way, which is weird. Good luck. Good luck with this advice. It was a mess. This advice was a mess. Enjoy it.
Thank you for both of you bantering back and forth. It was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
And for you, you talked about how much you love New York, and I just so relate to it. And I've been here my whole life and watched it go up and down. And he took me to California, and I came back here, and I just couldn't do it. Now he wants Florida, and I still can't do it. But
Don't do it.
but what my question is that what I loved about it is I felt, you know, besides thank you for sharing your vulnerability, but it was just so New York, and it was so fast-paced, and it was written so well. And because the country is so divided, I am so curious to know how, and I don't know if you guys know, or how it's been accepted, like in the Midwest, or, you know, how has it been received in other places?
We're still in our first few weeks of it. I don't know, but I know this, that every decision you make to try to appeal to more people is a decision that's, for some reason, even though it should make you more popular, it flattens what you do. So I always think of like one person that I'm writing for. That's the great thing about having an editor that you love, or a producer that you love, or like a spouse that you're excited to read your work, is that if you have this one person that you are trying to tickle and delight, I feel like that's your best bet. And I don't know about the Midwest. I mean, I hope they like it. I hope they like it. It's on earlier for them.
Well, you got me, so you got that one.
It's like,
All right. I think maybe just one more, or a couple if they're quick.
Thank you so much, and I loved the book, and I found a lot that really resonated with me with this book as a Jewish New Yorker, obviously. And I guess obviously, I guess my question is really, I mean, fitting for the New York Jewish Book Festival. What makes this a Jewish book, and kind of how that fits into the theme? And it's kind of like, what makes this a New York book? Because those are kind of euphemisms for each other.
I know. When I was about to publish the book, someone asked me if I didn't want to change the title because it's a little New Yorky. And I was like, what do you mean? It means Jewish. And I guess this is the thing I've been thinking about, because I'm asked that question a lot these days. I also am very lucky to be at a network that has the actual most Jewish show running, which is The Patient. The Patient is the most Jewish show ever to be on television, and I include, I don't know, Yentl wasn't a show. I include that. I think I'll say two things. Number one, that when I hear that question, this is what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the fact that my hero, again, Jonathan Franzen, wrote this book this year called Crossroads that's about a youth pastor who's struggling with his faith and fidelity in the church. What's the thing you live in a church? A church?
Rectory?
Yes, a rectory. We don't know. We don't know, right? Right in this room? Thank you. He lives in a rectory with his family, and they're all struggling with their faith. And that is called a great American novel. I have a mezuzah, and like in the third episode, there's a Shabbat dinner, and this is called a Jewish show. And to me, what that says is like this old question that we've always had, which is like, are we Americans? Like the big Philip Roth question is, are Jews Americans? I guess the answer is no. You know, in light of everything that's going on in this country and in other countries, it must be that for this to be so radical, this is a show that takes place in New York, but the guy's named Fleishman, and he has a mezuzah. I don't know. So I guess that's what makes it a Jewish show, is that it is radical. A thing I did not realize. I was always told from the time I was in college that you write what you know. And I don't even think I'm writing, I'm just writing like who I hang out with. And I guess it's radical for Jews to just walk around being Jewish without talking about it. Or without leaving orthodoxy, or without becoming Orthodox. Like the trajectory that the American, perhaps Midwestern viewership needs is to watch Orthodox people try to leave Orthodoxy, even though the Orthodox people I know are very happy. Or just be tortured about Jewishness, or be worried about anti-Semitism. To get up in the morning and go to work and come home is radical.
I have a slightly different answer to the question, if I may.
He may.
As a critic, which is that what makes this a Jewish novel and a Jewish show is it is fundamentally about the inescapability of ethical duty, and that you can run as far as you want. And this is what defines American Jewish literature as Jewish, because what you said about your book, about just the sort of the casual Jewishness in a way of the characters, is true of a lot of Malamud and Roth and other writers as well.
Are those called Jewish books?
Well, what I would say that what marks, what defines, at least in sort of American Jewish literature, let's say, I'm not an expert on all of the other things, but is that no matter how far you go into America or into sex or into anything else, in a way the commandments will come and get you. You know, the ethical duties, whether they're expressed religiously or not, the imperative to do the right thing will find you, and you will have to reckon with that. And I think that that's what this book is about, what this show is about.
That's what makes my book.
That's what makes your book a Jewish show, right?
That's amazing. That's amazing. I thought it was because his name was Fleishman and he had a mezuzah.
No.
It's amazing. I mean, there's a bat mitzvah coming up.
Okay. All right, one more. One more, sir.
That's amazing.
Hi, I'm a Jewish person from the Midwest, so hello.
Thank you for coming to represent.
Another one right here. My question was going to be not related to what everyone just talked about, but I really do appreciate that conversation. And just so everyone knows, there are Jews in the Midwest.
I'm married to one, actually, from the Midwest, yes.
I was really impressed with the cast. I thought the cast was really exciting. A lot of people that at one point were like some of my favorite people on TV, and kind of I'd forgotten about a little tiny bit. And now we're back, and I'm just curious, did you get to have a role in the casting, and how did you go about bringing back, Ted Mosby and like some of them?
I was very lucky that the book was read by a large swath of people in that sort of, under that tent of the kind of person who would play a role on the show, which does not mean Jewish. It means like a sort of cosmopolitan, sort of arts invested person. How was I with my producing partners did the casting, and these people were our first choice. And they said yes, and they all said yes immediately. And Susanna Grant, whom I mentioned as one of our producers, said to me a million times, it just never works out that you get the person you definitely want. Over the course of these months, at first I looked at it as great luck. Then I looked at it as great pedigree. We had these directors attached that no actor wouldn't want to work with: Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Ferris. And then we had other but at the beginning, this show, and Sarah and Susanna and FX, this show had a great pedigree. And so that signals to certain people, this might happen, right? This might happen, and it might be the thing that we're describing that it would be. But then over the course of the time, I've stopped thinking of myself as lucky, and now I just think, what if I'm excellent at casting? What if that's what I should be doing? Because as I watched them, as I watched it play out. It's like, there was not an asterisk. There was not one wrong line reading. There was not one person who didn't make it better. Like, that's amazing. When does that happen? When do you watch something where the casting is, I mean, I hate to say, I just want to be honest with you. You know, New Yorkers are honest people. I don't know. It feels like magic now. Now in retrospect, it feels like magic. I was so sure of it, and we were so sure of these choices. And maybe it's a thing about specificity. Maybe the more specifically you write something, the fewer people can play it. That's what I'm left with. Do we have time for a couple more? Are there any more questions?
Okay.
Did we answer? Oh, there's one right there.
All right, one, yes.
Let's just do one.
A quick one.
Just no
But
pressure.
Yes.
Interested before when you said you wrote Rachel as a horrible bitch. I read the book and I've been watching the show and I've been reading some recaps of the show and I noticed that, all the recappers kind of bend over backwards to, sort of explain the ways that Toby's behavior is horrible and Rachel is actually, this traumatized, misunderstood woman, which, I guess on a level she is. But, I think by doing that sometimes you also flatten the show because then it becomes the woman can't be flawed and the woman must be right in some way. And I was just wondering how you feel about the reception towards Rachel versus Toby.
About the what?
About the critical reception around Rachel's behavior versus Toby's.
So it's a very strange thing. I haven't read any recaps so far that were not written by people who read the book. Wait, did I not double negative that enough? Everyone I've read recaps from has also read the book. And I think also that it is so rare now in the culture that you would just have the story of a white guy getting a divorce, that anyone smart enough to be writing media recaps is probably also smart enough to know that something's up. And also, look at Claire Danes. I remember watching it and being like, oh boy, this might not work out because she's so good and she's so watchable and she's so magnetic. I think she pulls it. I think the project is pulled off in the end, but it's really a lot about what I was saying about the white space around a character. She had to show up as a complete person. And you're not just looking at Claire Danes, you're looking at Claire Danes, whom you remember from My So-Called Life. Like, you have a long history with Claire Danes, and it's very hard to divorce your history with Claire Danes from watching it. And also, that I'd leave a lot of room also for the fact that, maybe people are just tired of hearing a man complain about what a bitch his ex-wife was. Maybe we have stopped as a culture. Maybe the difference, by the way, between when I wrote the book in 2016 and now is that we almost more immediately reject it. And that is a really interesting place to be, right? I'm fascinated by it. It's a good question.
All right. Thank you, Taffy.
Thank you,
Thank you
Tony
all.
Scott.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you very much. Those were great questions.
What?
Those were great questions and great critical analysis.
Let's give one more round of applause to Taffy Brodesser-Akner and A.O. Scott. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for joining us. The New York Jewish Book Festival continues on Sunday. With 32 events here at the museum, there is something for everyone. We hope you'll join us. You'll spread the word to your friends and family. Starting at 10 a.m., going till roughly 9 p.m. One of the events is with A.O. Scott. He'll be in conversation with Mark Harris and Annette Instorff. That starts here at 2:30. For everyone joining us on the live stream, 7 keynotes will be live streamed here at Safra Hall. Again, copies of both the books are available in the lobby and on our shop at shop.mjhnyc.org. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.